I am extremely humbled that I have been asked to give this presentation on this extraordinarily important day. First, let me share screen. So I'm going to share the screen and I'm going to run and start my slide presentation. I hope everybody can see and hear the slide presentation. Sound working okay? Give me a hands up. Okay, wonderful. So on this very important occasion, is this presentation Buddhism and Empowerment Paving the Way for Action and Change? This is 3rd of June, and the 5th of June is when the world celebrates World Environment Day. So here is the momentous meeting between Arhat Mahinda and King Devanampia Tissa. And this is the first instance of empowerment in Sri Lanka, leading to the transformation of a king. And all the subsequent happenings since then, the recording of and the writing of the Pali Canon, and from there on, not just in Sri Lanka, the spread of Buddhism, but through Sri Lanka, and those from Sri Lanka taking the Buddha Dhamma to many parts of the world. And now you see, as we are going to see later on, the tangible impacts of the Buddha Dhamma throughout the world. So today's presentation, we are going to delve into the role of empowerment in Buddhism, have a look at what the Buddha did, the significance and the impact of his life and teachings, explore tools for empowerment in action, examine the significance of speaking only from experience, and draw on the early Buddhist texts to shed light on this, and also to examine clear case studies from the radical discourses of the Buddha to illustrate how the principles of Buddhism can be applied in our interactions with the environment, and discuss ways that the Buddha Dhamma can be utilized to effect positive changes in our lives and in society. So what exactly do we mean by empowerment? Generally, empowerment can be defined as the state or process of gaining greater control over one's lives and taking responsibility for one's own action and decisions. It involves the development of autonomy and self-determination, both on an individual and community level, which enables people to become more confident and self-assured. Empowerment allows individuals and communities to take charge of their own lives and fulfill their responsibilities to themselves and society. So what does then empowerment mean in Buddhism, for instance? The Buddha in many discourses talked about strengthening oneself. For instance, Dhammapada 380, Attahi attano nato, attahi attano gati. You are the master of yourself, you are indeed your refuge. And then what could be the translation of the term empowerment into Pali? A possible Pali equivalent could be strengthening oneself, could be attano bala padana. Now, I am a student of Pali. It is possible that there are scholars in Pali, so please come in and make any other alternative suggestions. But this is how I uh, understand empowerment as in the Pali context. Atano meaning one's own or oneself, Bala meaning strength or power, which the Buddha talked about at length, and Apadana or Apatti, which can mean acquisition or attainment, suggesting a process of gaining or increasing on a gradual basis. So now I am asking the question, how radical do you want to be? Because we talk about progressive attitudes and so on and so forth. So let's take this context within the framework of what the Buddha said and did. Siddhartha Gautama was born into privilege. He was the son of a ruler of the Sakyan Janapada. The Shakyans formed an independent oligarchic republican state known as the Sakyan Janarajya. It is one of the 16 Janapadas that were prevalent at the time. It functioned as an oligarchy ruled by an elite council who were mainly sort of warriors and those from the ministerial class. So here is the tiny Shakyan kingdom nestled in the north between the mighty Magadha and the next in terms of size, the Kosala kingdom. So on Vesak Day, and we witnessed the coronation day not so long ago. And as memories of these, and by the way, the coronation day took place exactly on Vesak Day, just to remind you. So we saw the glamour and the glitter of the coronation. So what could compel a prince blessed with the luxuries of palace life to abandon all he knew, the gold and the glitter, horse-drawn carriages, the swords and staffs, the ermine and the silk, and to embark on a journey into the great unknown with nothing more than wearing a simple ochre robe? What could compel a prince? And here, in his own words, sometime later, while still a black-haired youth, blessed with youth in the prime of life, though my mother and my father wished otherwise, weeping with tearful faces, I shaved off my hair and beard, dressed in ochre robes, and went forth from lay life into homelessness. And so the Buddha was after, I set out to discover what is skillful, kinkusalagavesi, seeking the supreme state of sublime peace, santivarapadam. So this was his quest, but it is something not that very different, because we do also are in a quest in many ways to better ourselves, to be more effective, we ask questions about these things, and we all seek this state of peace and calmness in our lives. And this is much more better explained by this wonderful book called The Buddha and the Concept of Freedom by Professor David J. Kalupahana. It is in page 13. When you have time, please get hold of this book because it is, I think, a very important book to read. So, Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, embarked on an arduous journey of self-discovery, relentlessly exploring the depths of human experience. He encountered and studied with renowned spiritual leaders, immersed himself in various practices, subjected his body to extreme austerities, all in the pursuit of finding peace. In the face of immense challenges, Siddhartha Gautama remained steadfast and resolute in his quest for understanding. He sought a path that transcended pain, distress, challenges, and impermanence that characterized the human condition. And then at last, the moment arrived when the Buddha embraced a sustainable approach to mental health and well-being. In the vast landscape of human history, a few moments stand as profoundly transformative as the Buddha's pivotal breakthrough in concentration. This moment continues to touch and impact millions across this planet. Take a moment to consider this singular moment, which occurred as a young mendicant sat meditating beneath the ancient famed Bodhi tree in India, marked the beginning of the birth of one of the world's most enduring, powerful, and radical spiritual teachings. And here's how the Buddha repeatedly described this moment in the Gautama Sutta. Tassamayang bhikkhave yoniso manasikara ahupanyaya abhisamayo. Then mendicants, through sustained focus. The operative term here is sustained focus. There was for me a breakthrough in wisdom. Take a moment to drink in this singular moment, which then has impacted the world. Tassamayang bhikkhave yoniso manasikara ahupanyaya abhisamaya. Then mendicants, through sustained focus, there was for me a breakthrough in understanding clearly. The life of the Buddha was marked by a number of empowering characteristics that are relevant and inspiring today. And despite coming from a small state, he went on to lead a remarkable life of spiritual and social transformation. One of the Buddha's notable characteristics was his active engagement with the world. Unlike other religious leaders of his time, he did not retreat to a cave or to a monastery to meditate away his life. Instead, he traveled extensively throughout the length and breadth of his areas of operation, interacting with people from all walks of life, including kings, rulers, Brahmins, merchants, and youth. And he used these interactions as opportunities to share his insight and his teachings and to challenge the social norms and structures that perpetuated society at the time. So we go into one of the first aspects of empowerment and transformation. Change starts with me. And in the Dhammapada 165, the Buddha emphatically points out that change starts with oneself. By oneself is wrongdoing done, by oneself is one defiled, by oneself wrongdoing not done, by oneself is one purified. Purity and impurity come from oneself. No one can purify another. When peoples change, structures change. When structures change, people change. And the Buddha's life is one from personal to global change. The Buddha's teachings included a radical understanding of the interdependence and co-arising, which emphasized the interconnectedness of all phenomena and the need for sustainable living. Dependent origination or dependent arising is a path-breaking teaching of the Buddha. It states that all dhammas, phenomena, arise in dependence upon other dhammas. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising pada of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. And with the cessation of this, that ceases, as in the Asuttava Sutta. I would suggest that in the annals of environmental thinking, the Buddha was one of the foremost in highlighting the dependence between people and nature. And so, I'm not going to go into all these various aspects, but I'm going to breeze through the extraordinary range of issues which the Buddha dealt with. And I'm going to do this in summary form. The Buddha challenged institutionalized religion, religious casteism, and racism, and pointed out the potential in all to transform and liberate themselves. The Buddha's Sangha, or community of followers, was also notable for its inclusiveness and democratic structures. I have given you, and there are so many different sightings I could give from the early Buddhist texts, but I've just chosen one to highlight these various critical issues which the Buddha dealt with. But there are many others which you could easily refer to. He established the Bhikkhuni order, the first ever spiritual women's order in the world. inclusion from disadvantaged communities and the LGBTQ community in the Vinaya Pitaka. And also, I would like to point out to you the Soreya Vattu Sutta, which deals with gender change. Practice the communal ownership of property, past ownership of material possessions to the community always when the Buddha was gifted with a park, a grove, or other possessions. Dealt with and spoke very clearly in a challenging way about profligate and corrupt living amongst the people who are of powerful orientation in society. Highlighted recycling and waste and spoke out about the trafficking of women and girls which were prevalent at the time and a favorite pastime of the aristocrats. Dealing with the causes of political, social, and economic unrest. Dealt with the purpose of wealth, the ethics of wealth, and the ethical use of wealth. Highlighted 10 principles of governance. And then, of course, we come to the first historical Satipatthana Sutta, the first guided meditation, mindfulness teaching, and take a moment to pause and think through the fact that this process is now bringing beneficial impacts to millions across the world. This process has been examined, assessed scientifically, and offered through universities, seats of learning, and many medical establishments throughout the world. Speaking as far as the UK is concerned, the National Health Service, of course, now has a section about mindfulness and its use to reduce stress. Moving on to the environment, the Buddha on sustainability. Digarattang hitaya sukhaya. And this is quite extraordinary because this is 2,500 years ago. Ponder this statement, Digarattang hitaya sukhaya, lasting welfare and happiness. We then come to tools for empowerment. The Buddha provided specific tools for the empowerment of an individual. First of all, direct experience, the investigative power of the Dhamma. And here it is. There is one Pali word which I think all of us recite every day. And it is important when we recite it to take a moment to dwell on this term, ehi passiko. Ehi, which means to come, and passa, which is to see, and one who sees. It is part of the collection that is called the Mahaparitam, the Great Safeguard. You can download this book. It is available on the internet if you seek. Rejecting outright blind faith and belief, the Buddha encouraged people to come and see. It is not to come and believe. It is not to come and pray. It is to come and see. Try out his teachings for themselves, to witness the fruits of practice through experience and accept if you need to, or just keep it aside if you don't want to. There was no compulsion. So also this famous Sri Lankan born Bhante Gunratna, who has written some path-breaking books on mindfulness, says Buddhist practice is an ongoing investigation of reality. Its intention is to pick apart the screen of lies and delusions through which we normally view the world. The Ehipassiko principle, come and see, can be applied not only to the formal practices of meditation and the study of the Dhamma, but also to the challenges and experiences in our lives every day. By approaching investigations with an investigative mindset, practitioners can gain valuable insights into the workings of their own minds, the nature of suffering, and the potential for liberation. The continuous inquiry, reflection, and contemplation helps to integrate the teachings of the Buddha Dhamma into the fabric of one's own life, making the path of practice a living, breathing reality. Then we move to bhavana. Embark on an enthralling journey into the world of meditation, a term derived from the Buddha's captivating concept, bhavana. A vivid and powerful image, bhavana, stems from the term bhav, meaning cultivation, transforming into a metaphor for the mind's cultivation. It was not meditation that the Buddha talked about, it is bhavana, the scientific cultivation of the mind. And picture the Buddha's vibrant life traversing the sprawling farms and verdant fields, a testament to his worldly experience. And like in successfully cultivating a field demands specific skills, much like any other endeavor. What skills are indispensable and to what extent have they been honed? The Buddha's primary concern was the mind's cultivation, prompting him to teach a unique set of skills focused on fostering profound mental, emotional, and physical tranquility, coupled with a keen insight into the experience of one's lived situations. Then comes countering the anusayas, the latent tendencies in our lives. And the Buddha talked about the 10 fetters which undermine our talents and skills, which overwhelm our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in unconscious ways. He compared it to mud sitting at the bottom of a pond. When the mud disturbs, it arises to the top. So there are the 10 fetters: self-identity, doubt, clinging to rituals and rules, sensual desire, ill will, craving for material existence, craving for immaterial existence, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. But the interesting thing is that whilst talking about the inherent negative tendencies, the Buddha also talked about the positive and the constructive inherent tendencies that we are born with, the wholesome roots, nidanyani, indicating contentment, love, understanding, which are sources that give cause to wholesome deeds. So the Pali term nidana is derived from two components, ni and dana. The prefix ni in Pali and Sanskrit signifies down or in, an inward direction. And the second part of dana comes from the Pali to give or to bestow. So together, nidana means giving down or bestowing in, which conveys the idea of something that acts as a cause, a foundation for other phenomena. So we have with Charles Darwin, the survival of the fittest in evolutionary theory as a way of describing the mechanisms of natural selection. The biological concept of fitness is defined as a reproductive success. Then we have Professor Jonas Salk, the one who came up with the polio vaccine, who talked about the survival of the wisest, challenging the notion of the survival of the fittest by emphasizing the importance of wisdom, knowledge, and collaboration in human progress. It's not just the survival of the fittest, it's the survival of the wisest in human progress. And Salk believed that the key to our long-term survival and advancement lies in our ability to work together, to share knowledge and make wise and ethical decisions that benefit the greater good. And the same with Professor Richard Leakey. And I was in Nairobi when he released his book, this path-breaking book called Origins, where he emphasized the inherent potential for compassion and other positive qualities within humans, suggesting that these latent positive tendencies have played a role in the evolution and the progress of our species. So there are other evolutionary biologists as well. I'm not going to go into naming all of them, which align with the Buddha Dhamma, which encourages the development of inherent virtuous qualities such as compassion, loving kindness, and wisdom for personal and collective well-being. In this sense, the Buddha's teachings and the teachings of several evolutionary biologists and anthropologists on human evolution share a common ground: the understanding that the cultivation of positive qualities is essential for the progress of humankind. And so we have this when the Buddha talks about in this wonderful Metta Sutta. Even as a mother would protect her child, her only child, so too for all creatures a boundless heart. We have then 4 noble truths, which all of you know. The truth about suffering, the truth about the causes of suffering, the truth about the end of suffering, and the truth about the path that leads to the end of suffering. And this is interesting. And in this discussion, I would like to highlight one area which is not necessarily discussed often in this process. At the end of the 4 noble truths the Buddha talked about, this is the noble truth of suffering. Such was the vision, knowledge, wisdom, and realization and light that arose in me regarding teachings not learnt before from one another. This is the noble truth of suffering completely understood. So going back to the light that arose inside me, it's not outside, inside me, regarding teachings not learnt before from another. Such was the vision that arose in me. Ajahn Brahms, who visited Sri Lanka recently, rejigged this Four Noble Truths in his book, Who Ordered This Truckload of Dung, and he did it in this way. Happiness, the cause of happiness, the absence of happiness, and the cause for such an absence. I would leave you to ponder on this. And so we go into the Buddha's counseling for empowerment. And the Buddha's counseling for the facilitation of empowerment of the individual is a complete process. And here we have Tissa, a monk who complains about lethargy, the difficulties of living the Buddha Dhamma, and expressing anger and conceit towards other monks and ridiculing them all the time. And Tissa tells other monks, my body feels like it's drugged. I'm disoriented. The teachings don't inspire me. And there is dullness and drowsiness that fill my minds. And the Buddha tells to Tissa, I'm here to advise you, to support you, and to counsel you. So this is at the heart of Buddhist counseling, to advise, to support, and to counsel. All three together. And now we move to the case studies. Now, in the early Buddhist texts, or called the Pali Canon, there are many. Nearly every page there is a story. I have taken only a few, but I would like to point out to you these stories of transformational change. Do make the effort to delve into and look into these remarkable stories that exist in the Pali Canon. This is one interesting example of a transformational change, and this concerns Kujuttara, who moved from a slave to a sage. This is her story. She was a slave in the royal household in ancient India. She lived in the kingdom of Kausambi and served Queen Samavati, a chief consort to King Udena, the king of Kausambi. Kujuttara means in Pali, she was what is being described as ill-formed, or sometimes in English as a hunchback or crooked, as we have seen in this classic. Uttara means supreme, foremost, best. So, from the Dhammapada commentary translated by Burlingham, King Udena gave Queen Samavati 8 pieces of money to buy flowers with every day. The money was then given to Kujuttara, who went to a gardener called Sumana and bought flowers. And Sumana then told her, "Wait a moment, I've invited the teacher, be my guest, come over and listen to his discourse and see what you make of it." Kujitra listened to the discourse and it transformed her life. She was doing something quite interesting. She was in the habit, when she was given 8 pieces of money, kahapanas most likely, for herself to buy flowers, she kept 4 for herself every day and bought only flowers with 4 coins. But on that day, she decided to change and transform her life. She bought flowers for all 8 coins and then went and told the queen about what she did. She owned what she did and confessed to the queen. In turn, Samavati then did something quite interesting. She did not punish her, but then, because palace protocol made it difficult for her to go and attend the teachings of the Buddha, Kujutra was then tasked with going and listening to the Dhamma of the Buddha and then reporting back to the palace every time he preached the Dhamma when he came over to that region. So she did. And she was the one who memorized and recited the various teachings of the Buddha at the palace. The queen in turn discussed the gist of these teachings with King Udena and helped him to understand the teachings of the Buddha and to calm himself down. And over the period, the kingdom benefited. And the Buddha often highlighted Kujuttara as a role model. Please be like laywoman Kujuttara. He would urge women to tell their daughters as a role model. And in the numbered discourses, one in Anguttara Nikaya, in this particular sutta, the Buddha went further and he said, "The foremost of my lay women who are very learned is Kujuttara." And she then contributed to the dissemination of Buddha's teachings. And so you find in the Pali Canon 112 discourses which are attributed to her. Her prowess was more or less the same as that of the Venerable Ananda in memorizing the teachings of the Buddha. We move from Kujuttara to Sunita the sweeper. It is quite remarkable in the life of the Buddha to see the kind of people whom he empowered. Not just the kings, not just the aristocrats, but humble sweepers and people from all walks of life. This was the majesty and the beauty of his ministry. In the ancient heart of India, there lived a sweeper named Sunita. And Sunita's life then, as it is now on this earth, with 1 billion people on this planet, he was poor from one day to the next. And according to the Tathagata, he writes, I was born in a low-class family. We were poor with little to eat. My job was lowly. I threw out withered flowers. Shunned by people, I was disregarded and held in contempt. Lowering my heart, I showed reverence to many. But one day, as fate would have it, Sunitha crossed paths with the Buddha, and the Buddha was entering into the capital city of Magadha in northern India ahead of a procession. And Sunitha was struck with awe and reverence. He dropped his carrying pole and approached the Buddha. Moved by Sunitha's humble and sincere gesture, the compassionate Buddha stopped. And so the Theragatha continued, and Sunitha writes or says, then I saw the Buddha at the fore of the mendicant Sangha. The great hero was entering the capital city of Magadha. Throwing away my carrying pole, I approached him to pay homage. Out of compassion for me, the Supreme Man stood still. When I paid homage at the teacher's feet, I stood to one side and asked the Supreme Being for going forth. Then the teacher, being sympathetic and having compassion for the whole world, said to me, come, monk. That was my ordination. And with that, Sunitha was ordained. And the Buddha provided a way out for deeply entrenched barriers of society, social hierarchy and discrimination that has plagued humanity for ages. Sunitha left his past behind and embarked on a spiritual journey of self-discovery. He sought solace in nature and the tireless practice of the teachings imparted by the Buddha. One day he finally achieved what he was striving for, staying alone in the wilderness. It is reported as him saying, meditating tirelessly, I have completed what the teacher taught, as the victor advised me. Upon hearing Sunitha's remarkable transformation and spiritual change, the Buddha smiled, recognizing the incredible journey of this humble sweeper and his destiny. We move now from Sunitha the sweeper to Upali the barber. These are all, by the way, to emphasize, in the Pali Canon, these rich stories of unusual transformational change. According to the Tipitaka, Upali the barber had a talent for cutting hair, and he was highly sought after. He must have been a very, very adept barber, because he was sought after by the fashionistas of the day, the wealthy and the privileged princes of the city of Vesali in Bihar. Upali worked as a barber to a royal family. His masters, the princes, were keen to see the Buddha. So Upali was asked to go along with them. And then when the group reached their destination, the princes gave Upali a bag of riches and told him to go home. But after some deliberation, Upali opted out against taking the wealth and journeyed with the princes to see the Buddha. When the group then went to see the Buddha, the princes asked the Buddha to ordain Upali first because of his dedication and loyalty. So the Buddha recognized Upali's potential immediately, more or less, and Upali expressed his desire to become a monk, and the Buddha ordained him as one of his followers. And so it is said in the Vinaya, and the Buddha had Upali go forth first, and afterwards the young Sakyans. Venerable Upali's life as a monk was fulfilling. Like Venerable Ananda, he was known for his prodigious memory, and he used that to his great effect in his role as a monk. He became well versed in the Vinaya, the monastic code of conduct, and was able to recite its rules from memory. This made him a valuable database for the Sangha, and he was able to provide guidance on how to follow the Vinaya correctly. And the Buddha recognized that disputes could arise within the community. He set out clear guidelines on how they could be resolved. And it was Venerable Upali's task to memorize and pass these rules, which have now come down to us from generations, ensuring that they continue to benefit the Sangha and also to all of us. It was a Baba, a former Baba, who did this. And as a result of his efforts, this former Baba's skills was highlighted by the Buddha during his numerous skills assessments of his teams. He said in the Numbered Discourses, Anguttara 1, chapter 4, 17, "The foremost of my monk's disciples whom I have memorized, who has memorized the monastic law, is Upali. He became skilled in the Dhamma and legal affairs as well. One of his memorable other contributions is in establishing guidelines for judicial matters in the monastic community. He was concerned about the impartiality of judging. So he went to the Buddha and asked the Buddha this question: Sir, how many qualities should a mendicant have to be agreed on as a judge? And the Buddha responded by saying, Upali, a mendicant should have 10 qualities that are required. The Buddha said a judge should be endowed with learning, analysis, proper conduct, eloquence, memory, mindfulness, wisdom, non-attachment, equanimity, and compassion. Very clear guidelines for those who are upholding the law even today. So this is the contribution of a former Baba, which is now impacting the world today through the Vinaya. We now come to the last of the teachings in terms of the case studies, the defense and protection of Angulimala. Now, you have all heard about Angulimala, so I'm not going to repeat his story, but there is one particular aspect of the story which is not highlighted. This is this person called Angulimala, who came from a very aristocratic family, was sent to study in a prestigious school under a prestigious teacher, and then suddenly found himself to move into the area of serial killing and becoming a terrorist and a highwayman and a brigand. So Angulimala was collecting fingers to make a necklace, hence his name Angulimala, finger necklace. And he thought that he could then also uh, get the fingers of the Buddha, attack the Buddha, and also add it to his trophy. But matters uh, transpired differently, and Angulimala then became a follower of the Buddha Dhamma. But here's what's interesting here. When Angulimala decided to become a monk and then was given refuge at the monastery by the Buddha, word then spread from the communities that this brigand or this highwayman was in a temple, residing in a temple, and that reached the ears of King Pasenadi of Kosala, because there was really widespread antagonism and hatred towards this individual. So when the king heard about the fact that uh, Angulimala was residing in a particular temple, he mustered 500 or so. So that's what the text says, which means when the text says 500, it's many. And then with 500 soldiers, he went to the temple to see what was happening and to see if it is possible to catch Angulimala and then put him to death. When he arrived, and this extraordinary mass of soldiers came to see the Buddha was very ironic, and there are quite a number of suttas where the Buddha shows an element of irony. He said the Buddha knew what King Pasenadi was after, but he just said, "What is it, great king? Is King Senia Bimbisara of Magadha angry with you? Or are the Lichavis of Vesali or some other opposing ruler?" And King Pasenadi said no. And he said he was after. And so this is this moment when the soldiers arrived at the monastery. Must have been quite a daunting situation to see soldiers suddenly surrounding the monastery where you are. And so the king explains to the Buddha his purpose. And the Buddha says, how would the king respond if he were to discover that Angulimala had given up the life of a mass murderer and become a monk? The king said he would salute him and offer to provide for his monastic vocation. And the king then reveals that Angulimala is sitting only a few feet away, his hair and beard shaven, a member of the Buddhist order. And the king, astounded, decides not to punish Angulimala. Now, this is quite interesting to see how it, to the extent of the Buddha's counseling, that he is prepared to go, because he is prepared to take a stand to the powerful at this time and to protect those who had entered the order. This is the sign of greatness, statespersonship, and leadership in the world. So we have the metamorphosis which is highlighted in the teachings of the Buddha. And I'd like to put across uh, a concept to you, because I was trying to search for an equivalent term in Pali to the transformation, to the metamorphosis process that you find in English. I've come across rupa, which is form, antara, which implies change, bhava, which denotes becoming. Rupa, antara, bhava, the becoming of a changed form, which is at the heart and the essence of the teachings of the Buddha. The process of empowerment is critically needed in the world today as we continue to address the existential threats such as pandemics, climate change, and conflict and poverty in our societies today. The Buddha demonstrated that change starts from within, that personal change leads to world change, that one person can make a difference. And the actions of the Buddha are truly inclusive, and the administration democratic, open, transparent, effective, and communal. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to make this presentation on Buddhism and the environment. I hand you over to our chair.